Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lesson 8.5, Writing and Solving Equations to Find Complementary Angles. Today's learning target is I can write and solve equations to find unknown complementary angles. So today's work is really going to be an extension of the work that we did last week with complementary angles. So let's quick review what makes two angles complementary. So remember from last week that complementary angles are two angles that add to 90 degrees. And if you look at the diagram on your screen, you can see that we have one angle here that measures 65 degrees and another angle that measures 25 degrees. And we can write an equation to show their relationship. So we say that 65 degrees, which was the first angle, plus the angle that was 25 degrees gives us a sum of 90. And that's because they're complementary. Before we dig into today's work, I want to review one more thing, which you may recall from our work with algebra way back in probably November and December. And that is how we solve two-step equations in order to isolate the variable, aka get x by itself. So I just want to do a quick review of how we learn to solve these two-step equations. So whenever you're solving an equation, you want to get this variable by itself. So the first thing that we learned to do was to kind of drop a line here at our equal sign so that we can keep these sides separate from one another. Our goal is to get this x by itself. In order to do that, we have to get rid of everything that's with it. So we're going to start with addition and subtraction. And because I have a plus 16 here, a positive 16, in order to get rid of that, I need to do the inverse. So I'm going to subtract 16 from this side. And whatever I do to one side of the equation, I have to make sure I do to the other in order to keep it balanced. So I'm going to subtract 16 from that side. These cancel because they're inverse. And I'm left over here on this side with 4x. And then on this side of my equation, I just do 60 minus 16, which gives me 44. Okay, now the last step to get x by itself here is to get rid of this 4. Now, right now, this actually is 4 times x. So to get rid of it, I need to do the inverse of multiply by 4, which would be to divide by 4. So I divide by 4 on both sides. 4 divided by 4 leaves me with 1, so those cancel, leaving me with x. And 44 divided by 4 gives me 11. So the solution to this equation is x equals 11. So for today's lesson, we're going to have to use what we know both about complementary angles and what we know about solving two-step equations. So let's get started. Here's my first example. Write and solve an equation to find the value of x, then find the value of the unknown angle. So you can see in our diagram here that this angle measures 20 degrees. And this angle here, we don't know how much it measures, but it's represented by 2 times x. So I'm going to come over here and write an equation that shows their relationship. Well, I know that these angles are complementary, so I know that 2x plus the angle that measures 20 degrees is going to give me a total of 90 degrees. So that's the first step to write my equation. Now I need to solve. So I'm going to drop my line. I'm going to undo addition and subtraction first always. So since here I have a plus 20 or a positive 20, the inverse would be subtract 20. I'm going to do that to both sides. Positive 20 and negative 20 are inverse operations, or inverse. So I'm left with 2x. 90 minus 20 is going to leave me with 70. Now, the last thing I have to remember that this 2x actually means 2 times x, so I'm multiplying. The inverse of multiply is to divide. So I'm going to divide this side by 2, divide this side by 2. The 2's cancel, leaves me with x is equal to 70 divided by 2 is 35. Now, I'm not done yet because I know that x equals 35. But my angle says that the measure is 2 times x. So the last thing I need to do here is come up and substitute in my x value into this expression. So the expression is 2 times x. So instead of x, I'm going to put in a 35 here. And when I figure this out, that will tell me the measure of the angle. So 2 times 35 is going to give me an angle that measures 70 degrees. Okay, so the first step is to write your equation. Second step is to, of course, solve your equation for x. And then the last thing you're going to do, step number 3, is to come over and substitute that value in and find the measure of the missing angle. Let's try one together. There we go. Let's try one together. So here we have another pair of complementary angles. And the first thing that we need to do is to write an equation to represent the relationship. So I'm going to ask you to do that now. I'm going to give you a little hint, right? We know that because they're complementary, they're going to add up to 90. So go ahead and write an equation to represent that relationship. Okay, so we had 64 degrees was the first angle, and 1/2 x was the second angle. So that should have been your equation. Now we need to solve for x. Now this is in a little bit of a different order, but that's okay. This is a positive 64. So the inverse of positive 64 is negative 64. So I'm going to subtract 64 from both sides. When I subtract, that leaves me with 1/2 x on this side, 1/2 times x on this side, and 90 minus 64 is going to leave me on this side with 26. Okay. My last step here, I have a 1/2 times x, so I need to do the inverse, which means I'm going to divide by 1/2. And you could also divide by 0.5 on your calculator if you don't have a fraction key. So you could, instead of putting in the fraction 1/2, use 0.5. These cancel. Okay. And if I do 26 divided by 0.5 on my calculator, that leaves me with 52. X equals 52. So we know that our final step is to come up here and substitute in our x value here. So I'm going to have you do that. Instead of 1/2 times x, we're going to have 1/2 times 52. Plug that in your calculator. Again, you can use 0.5, see what you come up with. Okay, if you said that this angle measured 26 degrees, you are absolutely correct. Nice job with that one. Okay, oops, I keep doing that. Let's go ahead and try the last one. Okay, so I'm going to have you take this one on your own. Write and solve an equation to find the value of x, then find the value of the unknown angle. So first step, take a look at the angles and write your equation. Okay, so you should have had 28, which was our first angle, plus 4x, gives us a total of 90 degrees. Our next step is to solve this equation. So go ahead, solve this equation, show all of the steps that you would take to solve this equation, and then make sure you include your final answer. So the first thing you should have done is subtract 28 from both sides, because negative 28 is the inverse of positive 28. The 28's cancel, and we are left with a 4x on this side. And when I do 98 minus 28, that leaves me with 62 on this side. Final step is to divide by 4 on both sides. Our 4's cancel, and we get x is equal to 15.5. You should have had those steps, and your answer is 15.5. Okay, last step, we're going to come up here and plug that value in, see what you come up with for the measure of that missing angle. So here you would have plugged in 4 times x, and x is 15.5. When I plug that in my calculator, I get a final answer of 62 degrees. Okay. All right. So today we learned how to solve equations, write and solve equations to find unknown complementary angles. So a few important things you want to remember. First, that complementary angles, they sum or add up to 90 degrees, and that's important when you're writing your equation. Once you have your equation written, to find the measure of the unknown angles, there are three simple steps that you have to follow. So first, write your equation that shows the relationship between the angles. Step number 2, solve to find the value of x. And then your final step is to take that value that you got for x and substitute it in to find the value of the missing angle. Thanks for joining me for today's lesson. Tune in tomorrow for the same work with supplementary angles.